Welcome, new and old friends. I just have a couple things to say, and then the stories will begin. Before you drift off into the dream realm, please remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment. If you'd like to find out about my social links, my website, how to help the channel, check the description box. Now turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. It's time to dream. Never Should Have Colonized Mars by temtd. In the not-so-distant future, humanity sets its sight on a new frontier, Mars. The advancement in technology and the quest for exploration drove scientists, engineers, and adventurers to dream of colonizing the Red Planet. They visioned a new world, a second chance for humanity, and the opportunity to expand beyond the confines of Earth. Little did they know that their ambitious dreams would unleash a horror beyond their wildest nightmares. In the year 2040, the first manned mission to Mars successfully landed on the barren surface of the planet. The crew, filled with excitement and hope, began to establish the first settlement known as Mars Base 1. Everything seemed promising at first. The atmosphere was thin but breathable, and with the help of advanced terraforming techniques, they managed to create a livable environment within the dome structures. Months turned into years, and Mars Base 1 grew in size and complexity. More settlers arrived, bringing their hopes and dreams of a new world. But as the settlement expanded, strange occurrences began to unfold. Crew members reported unexplainable sounds echoing through the corridors at night, eerie shadows flickering across their peripheral vision, and a deep sense of unease that hung over the entire base. One by one, crew members started to experience inexplicable physical and psychological anomalies. Migraines plagued them, sleep became elusive, and their once vibrant spirits were replaced by a sense of despair and dread. The colony's medical team struggled to find a cause for these afflictions, but their efforts proved fruitless. Some began to speculate that the planet itself was somehow to blame, a malevolent force lurking beneath the surface, biding its time. As time went on, the anomalies escalated. Equipment malfunction leading to accidents and near catastrophes. Strange apparitions appeared in the corner of crew members' vision, only to vanish when they turned to face them. It became clear that Mars was not the pristine frontier they had imagined. It was desolate, haunted wasteland. Whispers spread among the settlers. Talk of a dark history that Mars had kept hidden. It was said that eons ago, a technologically advanced civilization had thrived on the Red Planet, but their relentless pursuit of progress had come at a great cost. They delved too deep into forbidden knowledge, awakening ancient evil that consumed their society and left only ruins and echoes of their existence. As the tales grew more pervasive, so did the terrors that plagued Mars Base 1. Crew members reported waking up to find ancient symbols etched into their skin, as if a mysterious force had marked them for unknown purpose. Nightmares invaded their sleep, vivid visions of monstrous entities lurking just beyond the veil of reality. Desperation set in as the settlers realized they were trapped in a circle of fear and torment. Attempts to return to Earth failed as each spacecraft set for Earth mysteriously vanished upon reaching Mars' orbit. They were abandoned, left to face the horrors of the Red Planet alone. Eventually, the settlers turned on each other, driven to madness by the unrelenting presence that haunted them. Friends became enemies, and the once thriving colonies ascended into chaos and bloodshed. The once promising venture had become a nightmare that consumed the souls of its inhabitants. Mars became a graveyard, a testament to the folly of humanity's hubris. The survivors, if any remained, hid in the shadows, haunted by the knowledge that they had brought this darkness upon themselves. They had learned the hard way that some places were never meant to be colonized, that some frontiers should forever remain untouched. And so, the tale of Mars Base 1 serves as a chilling warning to those who dare to dream of colonizing the Red Planet. The horrors that await those are beyond comprehension, and those who seek to conquer Mars may find themselves succumbing to an evil force that knows no bounds. Let it be a reminder that some boundaries should never be crossed, for the consequences are too terrifying to fathom. Some monsters are bound by rules, like not being able to enter a home without permission, or being unable to move while observed. The humans seem to think these rules are superstitional laws that we must obey, rather than self-imposed challenges. The Data Eater by Carrier 3 is. After a weapons test spiraled out of control, the world found itself embroiled in a bitter war of arm-attrition with an ever-growing army of war machines. There wasn't a single strategy that worked. Bullets, after the first wave, they came back with reinforced armor. Napalm, they installed fire extinguishers and crash cooling systems. Nukes worked for a while, but once they figured out the EMP shielding, they just flipped themselves back over and kept on marching. Day after day, we had to watch helplessly from our command center as people were slaughtered in the thousands and trampled into unrecognizable mush by row after row of machine spiders, intent on achieving some horrific and unknown objective. China was the first to fall, albeit slowly. As effective as they were, even giant killer robots have their work cut out for them with a population of 2 billion. Slowly but surely, though, the numbers rose and we end up having to install a new counter to account for all the deaths. At first, we thought they would be the ones to stop the advance. Beijing had no qualms about hitting that big red button and nuking a few million of their own people to buy some time, but it only sped things up in the end. Hong Kong fell first, followed by Shanghai. From there, one city after the next was wiped off the map, either by a bot or a sub launching Long March 5. Even without access to their surveillance cameras, we could see the country growing darker and darker every day. When the first wave made its way over the western hills, we knew it was over. The impenetrable wall of tanks and artillery was wiped out within an hour, with nothing but mangled bodies and burned wrecks left behind. In the hopes that we could at least gain some actionable intel, we watched the formerly most popular nation in the world die in high definition. The remainder of the People's Army was torn to shreds in mere minutes. Some poor young soldier was dissected by a chain gun as he vainly fired away with his old Russian Diska, earning the dubious distinction of being the last offender of China. With the last threat neutralized, the bot swarmed into the surroundings in seemingly empty lots. After they took their places, they parted ranks and allowed an unusual-looking bot with a giant drill to come through. Unlike its brethren, it had a long cylinder fixed to its backside. When it reached the center of the lot, it activated its drill and plunged into the earth. For a few hours, we could only see plumps of dirt being kicked up from the hole. Then it happened. Like the tide running before a tsunami, all the guards suddenly retreated to the hills. After a few moments later, an orange glow began to emit from the hole. The surrounding dirt began to melt before the entire area was engulfed in a huge fireball. Apparently, they had discovered nukes. China was no more. Before the ash had even settled, they set their sights on Pyongyang and Moscow. Same results, both ending with a hole in the ground followed by a fireball. Every week, another country disappeared and our hopes of any kind of victory vanished. One day, the red phone rang. The president told us that all of Europe and Asia was gone. Following the conference with the remaining world leaders, he said everyone was in agreement that it was time for a Hail Mary. All of the world's resources were at our disposal, and all options were on the table. We only had one objective: save humanity. It was clear no amount of bullets, bombs, or nukes would stop them. We knew that from what we had saw in China. With seemingly no other option, we turned to the only option we had left: information. All cyber attacks had failed thus far, but the bots, seeming bent on winning the war in our domain, hadn't put much effort into attacking our networks. We set the eggheads to work immediately. Based on the simulations, pretty much every trick we had would have been a dud, and, more worryingly, could finally push the bots to turn to cyberspace as well. Just as we saw the pyramids being trampled to dust, one of the researchers got an idea. If we're fighting a computer that can beat us at every turn, we just need to send an equally smart program after it. The idea was almost stupidly simple. Send out another bot that can chase down the enemy and attack the data that was its lifeblood. For all their combat prowess, the bots were nothing without a sea of ones and zeros that allowed them to make sense of our world. The program's function was simple. It would devour every bit of data it would find, and in doing so, starve the tireless machine army that was making its way towards us. When he finished his presentation, the room was dead silent. It sounded promising, but we knew it meant we would completely neuter ourselves in the process. If it worked the way we intended, the only area we matched the bots in would be gone. No more satellites, no more comms, nothing. Considering the fate that was awaiting us, though, we figured we might as well give it a shot. We had the Data Eater, as we came to call it, ready in under a week. Even though every hacker and software engineer in what was left of the world was working on it, we didn't even have time to run a bug check on it. Without a moment to lose, we prepared to set it loose. At a press of a button, we dropped a proverbial shield to ensure that our little monster had the best chance of success it possibly could. Every firewall and security measure around the world was disabled, and every communication device we still had access to was set to let the Data Eater run free. A single command set it off, spraying it far and wide. Every satellite, cell tower, and mobile device in the world came under its control, spanning its digital tentacles through all of cyberspace. Almost instantly, our command center went dark as the digital gremlin ate its way through the most fundamental layers of our electronic devices. Blind to our outside world, all we could do was sit and wait while we stared at blank white screens in front of us. 3 weeks later, a runner showed up at our doors. A ship loaded to the gills with bots showed up at Staten Island, but only a single bot staggered out. It moved its gun as if it wanted to aim at something, but then it collapsed. In the following week, similar reports trickled in from other places. 3 months later, it was confirmed. The bots were down. July 7th was declared VB Day in recognition of the last of the world's continents being confirmed as liberated. We still were in the dark, but no one cared. We won. As the festives wore down, we visited the command center one last time to say goodbye and seal it for good. The monitor was still showing the grainy white screens, starving for instructions. Almost as if on cue, a dusty TLX terminal suddenly sprung to life. After we got over the shock, we heard it hum as sheets of paper inched its way out of the printer. We all ran over to see what was coming out. As quickly as it started, it stopped. There was a single line of text on the printout. "You forgot something." The white screens were flooded with images from all over the world, showing people withering in pain caused by some unknown attack. In that very moment, a member of our group broke out into a coughing fit. That coughing quickly turned to wrenching as he vomited some thick, reddish substance. We all jumped back instinctively, repulsed by the sight in front of us. Our disgust turned to horror as his features began to sag and his skin and muscles began to slide off his bones, spilling all over the floor with a wet splat. The kneeling skeleton, surrounded by blood and viscera, began to lose its shape as well, dropping to the pile. The footage on screen cut out and was replaced by a pixelated animation. A long strand of DNA disintegrated into a stream of ones and zeros, which was devoured by a set of gnawing teeth on the other side of the screen. In what could have only been a taunt at our foolish oversight, a laptop that had been sitting dormant blinked on. The screen was filled with a wall of code scrolling by at lightning speed. All at once it stopped. The head of the development team sprinted over to examine it. He didn't say a word, but when he suddenly covered his mouth, we all knew something was wrong. He started blabbering a bunch of computer terms nobody understood until our military liaison smacked him on the head and said, "Get to the damn point." Taken aback by the hard reset, he took a moment to compose himself. With a forlorn look on his face, he said, "We designed the program to seek out any data it could find and destroy it by any means necessary. The problem is, we never told it when to stop." "How the hell does that explain Jones turning into a puddle?" he shouted. Well, he stammered, "at its most basic level, DNA is kind of data as well." When those last words left his mouth, his lips melted off. The rest of his face followed suit before he collapsed to the floor and dissolved like our other colleague. The room fell into a stunned silence. No one dared move, afraid to see what might happen next. Suddenly, one of our female colleagues screamed. She was holding a clump of her hair in her hands, at the end of which was a thick red slime was dripping off. When the hair once was, more of the red slime was dripping out. She appeared to be weeping blood before her eyes dissolved and flowed out of their sockets. She attempted to scream again, only for a disgusting gurgle to come out instead. She unsteadily fell to her knees as the rest of her body began to break down. Within a minute, she was reduced to a puddle of slime. Apparently, the data eater had fine-tuned its method. Our camouflage-clad colleague charged the laptop, convinced he could stop this massacre by smashing it. After he smashed it with a single blow, he was also liquefied. The rest of the group followed suit, collapsing as they struggled in vain to fight off the invisible assault. As the last of the group fell, I felt something running down my cheek, hoping somehow it wasn't my skin dissolving. When I touched it with my hand, it felt sticky. My hand was completely covered in red when I looked at it. At that same moment, the vision in my left eye had gone blurry before going completely black. Something, no doubt the eye in question, ran down the front of my face. Seconds later, my legs gave out, the muscles completely eaten away. I fell to one side and felt a sickly sloshing feeling as my organs were pureed inside me. I wasn't going to make it either. My body frantically attempted to keep itself running despite the lack of working parts. Just as my vision started to fade in my remaining eye, the animation changed. Radio waves were bombarding nucleus, causing it to disintegrate into ones and zeros. The message was clear. To finish off its meal, the data eater was going to devour the earth. On paper, he was a perfect gentleman all night. I never opened my own door. He was polite and asked interesting questions. I didn't pay for anything, and he didn't push for a kiss goodnight. I still can't say that I'm a fan of alien abductions. Silent Night by 242. Santa Claus is coming to town. You better be good. He's watching while you're sleeping, knows when you're awake. I always thought that song was a creepy one. Then you had his elves invading our homes to spy on us. It became more and more scary during that time to be bad. And after last year, I never want to be on his naughty list again. Being 15 years old, I was past the whole Santa phase. My little brother was still 6 and totally believed, so he still got the gifts under the tree. The first year I didn't get gifts from Santa, he noticed, and I just told him little boys and girls got gifts from him. I was just too old now. He can get my share, though. But this year, I had been no good. I had been fighting with my parents over a boy I liked. He was no good for me. You know the story. I, of course, thought they were wrong. I had been sneaking out of the house to see him and was grounded just before Christmas. Seeing my room like I had been doing for a week was getting boring. It was Christmas Eve and I knew no one really would be out. I opened my window and slipped onto the roof, dangling myself off it before dropping to the ground. I had my house key to get in the front later, since the ladder I had been using to get back in was now chained up in the garage, in hopes I'd stop. The snow was thick on the ground as I started to walk through it, holding my coat around myself tightly. It had been more of a mild winter, still cold but not as bad as normal. I headed down the empty, silent street, walking to the gas station nearby. The neighborhood had many houses, but were still a lot of forest since they were still developing it. As I walked through the snow, I pulled out my phone to help me find my way, deciding to cut through a shortcut in a small woods that would get me to the station faster. I swore I could hear bells in the distance, just behind me. I looked back and saw nothing, no lights, no person, nothing to make a noise. I thought to myself the snow must be echoing things oddly. The second I stepped into the woods, though, everything felt different. I could feel pressure in my ears. The sound around me disappeared. Each step I took, nothing. No crunch of the snow. With the moon out, I could see the trees moving in the wind, but there was no crackling of wood or rustling of pine needles. I decided to turn back to escape this oddity, but when I turned around, there stood a man in a red suit. He had a list in his hand, looking at me and then at the list. When he turned it around, I saw my name written on it with Naughty next to it. The list just disappeared in his hand, and that's when he pulled something out of the sack next to him. I could see in it. There were presents, but also blood, arms, and legs. The gifts seemed untouched by the gore I saw. That's when I saw the blood-covered axe. I tried to let out a scream, but though I knew I was screaming, no sound filled the air. He smiled, his cruel, bloody smile. I turned around and took off down the snow-covered trail. My heart was racing. I could feel it in my chest and I could hear it in my ears, the only thing I could hear. The axe came down, inches from me, hitting a tree next to me. I let another silent scream as I tried to run harder, the snow making each step more difficult. Though others used the shortcut, it had just snowed a few hours before, each step more tiring than the last. I felt a sharp pain in my arm as he hit me, but just grazed it. I swore I could hear him laughing, a joy laugh. I dare not look back, my phone and its flashlight still in my hand, me trying my best to use it to see before me. I felt another sting as it got me in the back, another small gaze, cutting open my coat and shirt. I could feel my arm and back getting hot from the cuts he was causing me. I don't know how I got out of those woods, but I did, right next to the gas station I had been trying to get to. I kept running. I could hear my footsteps and the snow crunching under my feet once more. I let myself look back then and saw Santa Claus holding his blood-covered axe with a smile. He winked at me, and I could hear bells as he disappeared in a gust of snow. I called my parents, waking them up so they could get me. I had more cuts on my coat than I realized, and the one on my back was deeper than I first thought. I had to get stitches for it. When I got home, I found a note on my bed addressed to me with very fine handwriting. It read, "Naughty, naughty Sarah. I decide you should get another chance to be on the nice list. If you're on the naughty list again, I will have to finish what we started tonight. Santa." The letter had a piece of my coat in it, with a bit of blood. I tried to scream in horror, but no sound came out. That's when I noticed the elf sitting on my dresser, watching me. I have been good this year, done everything my parents have asked, but if I dare to speak of that night, nothing comes out. And I always see that elf somewhere in the room. I've been watched closely this whole year, and I hope I did enough to get on the nice list. Oh God, I hear bells. I hear bells. The man pleaded with the child to stop, begging her not to make him go through the agony of death and reincarnation again. She simply removed his mouth before holding him closer to the fire, enjoying the pain in his eyes of coal while he melted for the 10th time, and her friends prepared another body to transfer the hat to next. It Came Home for Christmas by dlschindler. Darkness prevailed in our community. No lights, no music. It was as though the world would not have a Christmas. Ours was the brightest, the place for carolers and the inspiration for everyone's festivities. Not anymore. My husband had always gone all out for Christmas, put up the most lights, inflatable snowman, an arbor of candy canes with a life-size Santa on our roof. We even had a native scene, although we were atheists. We just loved Christmas, and it was always the time when our family was at its best. Year after year, after our son had grown, he had brought his family home for Christmas. They'd always made a card together, a handmade Christmas card in a gold envelope. Each was a treasure to me. I loved the drawings from the kids and the handwritten greetings from my daughter-in-law and my son. They wouldn't be coming home this year, not after the horrific accident. The temperature had plummeted suddenly after nightfall, and the light rain from earlier had made conditions just a bit icy. Sometimes a little danger is more dangerous than a lot of danger. I wasn't sure anymore. The pain was too great. In the morning, I wouldn't get out of bed because I was holding on to the dream of my son and his family. I wanted to live in the dreams, forget the world. I couldn't speak or take care of my home. I just wasn't able to move on. My husband had kept working, and it angered me that he seemed to be handling it. I knew he was hurt by the loss, but he seemed to have healed and continued with his life. I was never going to heal. For me, life felt like a punishment, like I had somehow done something wrong and deserved the agony of losing him. The next year at Christmas, it only got worse. No one put up lights. The community we lived in had followed us into the holidays, and we had stopped celebrating. They still had their Christmas parties, but we weren't expected to come, and nobody decorated. Part of me felt that too, but I asked myself if I wanted something different. And although I would have accepted it, I wasn't going to ask for it. "I'm going to put up the tree and leave the gifts under it," my husband told me. I just nodded and said nothing. There was a part of me, a little girl who had believed in Santa, that thought their ghost might come at midnight and have Christmas one last time. I fell asleep watching a Christmas movie when they said that anyone can make a wish and it will come true on Christmas. I wanted to believe in that. I wanted to believe that I could wish it all away. Then my eyes opened up and I beheld them gathered, just as I wanted. I should have left it alone, should have accepted the visit and began to heal. But I wanted more. I couldn't accept that that was the last time I would see them. I wish my story was about how I had spent those sleepy moments on Christmas Eve with them, enjoying their ghostly visit and then saying goodbye. It's what I should have done. It would have ended the tragedy and allowed me to heal and move on. I simply couldn't let go, and they even told me to let them go. But I couldn't. I love them too much, and the pain was too great. A dark quest began, searching for a way to bring them back. If they could come back to me once, they could come again. I did my research, my energy slowly coming back. After almost a whole year of searching, I found out about a relic that could grant one wish. Occultists online agreed that it was real, and all of them also stated they would never touch the thing, for it would grant a wish, but only at a terrible price. I became a believer in the Lazarus touch, a mummified hand that had reputedly already raised the dead on many occasions for thousands of years. I left the house and drove to the city, finding the bookstore that had last held the object of my obsession. "I'm looking for the relic you sold," I told the owner of the bookstore. "You advertised it a few years ago. Who'd you sell it to?" I asked. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "This." I showed him a printed out screenshot of the dried up hand. "You called it the genuine Lazarus touch. Here's the final bid. You sold it." "I'm not going to tell you who I sold it to," he smirked. "Then tell me, is it real?" "It's real. I never used it, but it came from a Peabody estate. Do some research and find out what happened there. You tell me if it's real or not." I felt a chill, some instinct warning me to stop and let it go. I should have listened to my instincts. I pushed past the mild trepidation and said, "You seem like a man who will make a bargain. I'd do anything to know where it is." He smiled evilly, and I was right about him. He was willing to make a bargain with me. I only had to sell my soul, it seemed. But I felt driven and alone, and I wouldn't let anything stop me. With the secret of the relic's location in my hand, I left him there, wondering if I had paid too much. I made myself forget about the bookstore owner and focus on my quest. I took his advice and researched the Peabody estate, hoping I could learn something new. What I read shocked and horrified me. I should have stopped myself. I should have turned back. I felt the first pangs of fear and regret, seeing the rumors of what had happened. I knew they were true. Something about the man's reference to it had convinced me he knew it was true, and I could feel it. There was an evil presence already watching me. The decision to drive halfway across the land to get the relics seemed irreversible, even before I left. I had paid a heavy price for the information, and I wasn't going to back down without at least seeing it, to know I could possess it and make a wish. One wish that would come true. When I arrived at the home of the relic's new owner, I sat outside in my car. I felt nervous, unsure how to proceed. The malevolent presence that had been haunting me seemed to be feeding on me, and I felt afraid of it, afraid to let it in. If I had just turned back, I could let it go, but I thought about Christmas Eve a year before. I remember seeing them, smiling and with me, ghostly but intact. My fears were overwhelmed by my desire. When the lights in the house were out and I felt like everyone was asleep, I crept up. I found the back door unlocked and I entered. I'd never done anything like that before, but I was desperate. There was no way they would sell it to me, not when they had paid more money for it than my house was worth. I had no choice but to steal it. I was shaking with fear when I found it. My instincts were telling me to stop and go back, to leave it secure under the glass they had it under. As I stared at it, I knew its power. I knew it was real. It occurred to me that I did not have to steal it. All I had to do was hold it and make my wish. Lifting glass felt like a bad idea. Not because I could get caught, because I knew it would exact a terrible price. I was afraid, knowing the danger I was in. But I did not care. I had to see my son again, no matter what. I wish my son would come home for Christmas, I said. I felt its power. I knew my wish was granted. Dizzy, I dropped it and staggered and fell over. The noise I made alerted them of my intrusion. I clambered to my feet, my heart racing, and fled. As I sped away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the old man who owned it. He had come outside and was watching me drive away. The look on his face was of great concern rather than anger or fear at burglary. He looked like he was afraid for me, not of me. At home, I couldn't relax. My heart was still racing. Would he call the cops? Would they find me somehow? Those material fears presided. I tried everything to relax. I made myself some tea, took a hot shower, watched infomercials, and pretended I would buy something. I fell asleep on the couch, and my husband found me there in the morning. "Where did you go?" he asked. I wondered if he could somehow sense things I had done. He was looking at me like he knew my sins. I just shrugged. "I went out," I said. "I'm home now. I just need to go do some things." He eyed me with suspicion. I felt guilty. I went to him while he was quietly making some coffee and kissed him and loved him. He forgot his suspicions, leaving for work feeling happy, thinking his marriage was going well. It was the least I could do for him. Christmas Eve was just a day away. Years had gone by, and a few of our neighbors were hanging their lights. I walked around the neighborhood, greeting them and encouraging them. I knew my son was coming home for Christmas. On the night before Christmas, I sat awake, waiting for his arrival. My husband came downstairs and found me there and finally asked, "All right, what is going on?" Sounding worried, like he thought I had lost my mind. "He's coming home for Christmas. He'll be here soon. He's on his way," I said. "Who?" "Our son. He's on his way right now." "From his grave," my husband nodded. "I dreamed he was walking here from his grave, and now you are sitting there telling me it's happening." He looked pale. coldness washed over me, a deep feeling of horrified dread at the fruit of my efforts. He was right. Our son was walking through the night from his grave. I felt sick. I felt terrified. I thought of the smiling visits that I had last year and had lingered, and then said goodbye. What had I done? What have you done? He asked me, a look of unrecognition on his face. I don't know, I claimed. I knew what I had done, but it was too late. We both just stared in horror as the clock chimed midnight. Just then, there was a singular thump on the front step of our front porch. We both slowly turned and looked at the front door, our eyes widening realization and horror. What was out there was not our son, although it was him, dead for 3 years. There was another thump, something shuffling slowly with difficulty up the steps. My God, my husband was backing away. He's here. No, I whimpered in fright. This isn't what I meant. There was a final thump as the last step was taken by the shuffling corpse. Then I began to walk from the steps across the porch to the front door. I wasn't breathing, sweat beading on my face as I was holding up the couch's blanket, covering my mouth. My husband fled upstairs, unable to bear the horror of his son's remains knocking upon the door. Each knock on the door sent chills down my spine. I was frozen in terror, unable to respond. I just sat there shaking. It seemed to go on and on forever. I felt like I was in hell, being punished for my sins. I never believed in such things, but I no longer had that luxury. I knew what it was like to feel that torment and terror without end. Finally, after the longest and most horrifying night of my life, the sun began to rise. The knocking ceased, and the corpse reversed its steps, descending the stairs and leaving me to wail in anguish and trauma. When I had wept and shaken, I forced myself up to go to that door. With nauseating trepidation, I unlocked it and began to open it slowly. There was a coldness outside and a stench of moldy old rot. There on the porch, I saw grave dirt and dried maggot casings, the moldy footprints of the corpse showing its path through the night. I looked down and saw what he had left me. A little dirt was smudged on a golden envelope. I fell to my knees and picked it up. I held it to my heart, and somehow, as I stared out at the Christmas sunrise, I was finally able to say goodbye. The only guilt the woman had was that she was going to leave her son in a world full of monsters like those who were filming her. Jump, her son commented on the grainy live stream of the woman standing on the guardrail of a bridge. Night Out at the 10 p.m. Diner by CreepyStoriesJR. The clock had just struck 9:30 p.m. as Eric and I walked down the fog-filled streets, our jackets zipped tight against the night's chill. The city was unusually quiet, the mist swallowing sound and muting the neon lights that flickered above closed storefronts. I stuffed my hands deeper into my pockets, the anticipation building inside me. It was Eric's idea to come out here, to find the infamous diner that only opens at night. I wasn't convinced it was a good idea, but curiosity gnawed at me. What's the deal with this place again? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was the fog or the unsettling silence around us. Eric shot me a grin, his breath visible in the cold air. Rumor has it that the diner opens at exactly 10 p.m. and closes before dawn. Some people say it's older than the city itself. He paused for effect. And of course, the rules. The rules. That's what everyone talks about. Online forums, late-night campus discussions, and even random whispers at parties. The 10 p.m. diner's rules were legendary, each more bizarre than the last. Yet, despite all the speculation, no one seemed to know why they existed or who enforced them. Some said it was just a quirky tradition to attract business. Others hinted at something darker, a power that the diner held over its patrons. You think it's just a gimmick? I asked, trying to sound casual. Probably, Eric replied. But isn't that part of the fun? Come on, where's your sense of adventure? I forced a smile, more to convince myself than him. The idea of the rules didn't sit right with me. But then again, how weird could a diner really be? We turned a corner, and the building came into view. It sat at the end of a darkened alleyway, wedged between two ancient brick structures. There it is, Eric said, nodding towards the dim glow ahead. The diner's facade was cracked and faded, its windows fogged out from the warmth inside. The only signs of life was a flickering neon sign above the entrance, casting a sickly yellow light onto the wet pavement. As we approached, I noticed a faint outline of people through the grime-streaked glass. My stomach tightened. You ready? Eric asked, grabbing the door handle. I hesitated for a split second, glancing at the street behind us. The fog seemed to thicken now, swallowing everything in its path. It felt like the world was closing in on us. I took a deep breath and nodded. Yeah, let's do this. Eric pulled the door open and we stepped inside. A wave of warm, stale air hit me, carried with it the scent of old leather, coffee, and a faint hint of something metallic. The interior was dimly lit, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. I scanned the room, trying to get my bearings. Booths lined the walls, the red leather cushions cracked and worn with age. A long counter stretched out on the opposite side, stools with torn fabric tops lined up neatly. There were a few customers scattered around, a man sitting by himself staring at the window, an elderly couple whispering over their cups, and a lone woman with her back to us, spooning sugars into her drink in a slow, methodical manner. But what struck me the most was how still everything seemed. The other patrons barely moved, their actions sluggish, like they were part of some strange, slow-motion dream. I glanced at Eric, who appeared to have noticed it too. His usual bravado seemed to wane slightly as we walked towards an empty booth in the center of the room. The seat squeaked under our weight as we sat down. Eric, always one for theatrics, leaned forward and whispered, "Okay, this place is officially creepy." "Yeah, no kidding," I replied, my eyes scanning the room again. Something about the diner made my skin crawl, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It was as if the place itself was watching us. Our conversation was interrupted by the silent arrival of a waitress. She appeared seemingly out of nowhere, placing 2 menus on the table without so much as a word. Her movements were smooth, almost robotic, and she left as quickly as she had come. Eric raised an eyebrow at me, clearly unnerved. "Well, that was something," he muttered. "Guess we're not getting the warm and friendly service tonight." I picked at the menu, my curiosity piqued. It felt old, the plastic cover worn and sticky to the touch. Then I noticed the writing on the front, bold black letters spelling out house rules. Beneath the title was a list of number of instructions, each one stranger than the last. Rule 1. Never sit facing the entrance unless you are the first customer to arrive. Rule 2. Never greet the staff when they approach, only speak when spoken to. Rule 3. If a stranger joins your table uninvited, offer them a sip of your drink, then excuse yourself to the restroom. Return only when the diner clock chimes. Rule 4. If you hear soft humming while eating, immediately close your eyes and wait for the humming to stop. Rule 5. If a waiter drops something, you must turn away and not look at them until they leave your table. Rule 6. If you hear your name whispered from behind, do not turn around. Pretend you did not hear it. Rule 7. Should your utensil fall, leave it there. Do not bend down to pick it up, or you risk seeing something under the table that shouldn't be there. Rule 8. If you hear footsteps following you as you leave, do not turn around. Slow your pace until the sound fades away. I read through the list twice, each rule more unsettling than the one before. My mouth went dry as I realized how specific they were. They weren't rules for a quaint diner experience. They were warnings. My eyes darted back to Rule 1. Never sit facing the entrance unless you're the first customer to arrive. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced over my shoulder at the glass door. "Look at this," Eric whispered, pointing at Rule 4. "If you hear soft humming while eating, close your eyes. What is this place? A haunted house?" I forced myself to laugh, but my heart wasn't in it. "It's probably just some elaborate gimmick," I said, trying to convince myself. "You know, to get people talking." "Yeah, right," Eric replied, his voice tinged with skepticism. "Well, we came here for an experience. Let's just roll with it." He looked at me, waiting for some kind of agreement. I nodded, feeling a tight knot of anxiety form in my chest. We flipped open the menu and pretended to browse the food options. Though neither of us really had an appetite, my eyes kept darting back to the rules, especially Rule 1. "Wait," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We weren't the first ones here," and I trailed off, glancing at the door. Through the grimy glass, something moved. I couldn't make it out clearly, just a dark silhouette shifting in and out of the foggy night. It was tall, unnaturally so, and seemed to sway as it stood there. I blinked, trying to focus, but it faded into the darkness. "What?" Eric asked, leaning forward. "What did you see?" "There's something out there," I muttered, not taking my eyes off the door. "I don't know what it was, but it looked." "Don't mess with me," he interrupted, his voice strained. "This place is already creepy enough." "I'm not messing with you," I snapped, turning back to face him. "I swear I saw something." We both went silent, the unease between us growing thicker. The rules weren't a joke. I was sure of it now. This place had its own set of laws, its own way of operating, and we were already violating one. The tension between us grew thicker with each passing second. I kept glancing at the entrance, scanning for any signs of movement through the glass. My mind replays the brief glimpse of that shadowy figure I had seen outside, and an icy fear gripped my chest. Eric shifted nervously across from me, tapping his finger on the table. We sat there in silence, waiting. The waitress reappeared, sliding up to our table without a sound, her hollow eyes staring straight through us. My skin crawled at the sight of her. Remembering Rule 2, I bit my tongue and stared at the menu in front of me, resisting the urge to greet her or even acknowledge her presence. Eric's eyes widened as he had to force himself to stay quiet. After a long, unsettling pause, the waitress finally spoke, her voice monotone and distant. "What would you like to order?" She didn't ask it like a question, more like a command. The words felt cold and wrong, echoing strangely in the air around us. It was as if the sound didn't belong in this place. Eric coughed and glanced at me, seeking some form of validation. I nodded subtly, indicating he should answer first. He took a deep breath and said, "I'll, have a black coffee and pancakes." His voice trembled slightly, but he managed to get his words out. The waitress turned her gaze to me, her eyes boring into mine like a predator assessing its prey. I swallowed hard, forced myself to meet her eye for only a moment before I replied, "Same for me, please." She didn't react, didn't even blink. She just scribbled something onto her notepad and turned to leave. As she walked away, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, as though a great weight had been lifted off my chest. I exhaled slowly, my heartbeat gradually returning to a more regular rhythm. "That was weird," Eric muttered, breaking the silence between us. "Did you see how she looked at us?" I nodded, rubbing my hands together to warm them. "Yeah, like she was judging us for even being here," I replied, keeping my voice low. "And the way she spoke, it was like she didn't care what we ordered, almost like it didn't matter." We sat in silence for a few minutes, staring at each other, too afraid to voice the questions racing through our minds. We both knew something wasn't right. This place felt wrong, like it was bending reality in subtle ways, making us question our perceptions. After what felt like an eternity, the waitress returned with our orders. She placed the coffee cups and plates in front of us with meticulous precision, her movements almost robotic. "Enjoy your meal," she intoned before turning her heels and drifting back to the shadows. "Did you hear that?" Eric whispered, leaning close to me. "She said enjoy your meal. It's like she was forcing herself to say it." I nodded, my eyes locked on the steaming cup of coffee in front of me. I had an overwhelming urge to down the coffee and leave, to get as far away from this diner as possible. But something else inside me, perhaps morbid curiosity, kept me rooted in my seat. I picked up my fork and prodded at the pancakes, watching the syrup ooze slowly down the sides. Then it started. A soft, morelic humming filling the air around us. My heart skipped a beat as I remembered Rule 4. If you hear soft humming while eating, immediately close your eyes and wait for the humming to stop. "Eric!" I hissed, grabbing his wrist. His eyes widened in alarm as he, too, began to hear the sound. "Close your eyes now." "What?" he stammered, his fork frozen in midair. "Just do it," I snapped, shutting my eyes tightly. I heard Eric mutter a curse before he followed suit. The humming grew louder, swelling into a haunting lullaby that reverberated through my skull. It was everywhere, in the air, in my ears, inside my own head. My grip on the fork tightened until my knuckles turned white. I kept my eyes squeezed shut, trying to focus on anything but the unnerving sound. I felt a cold presence sweep through the room, like a gust of wind in an enclosed space. My skin prickled, and the air grew thick and suffocating. Every instinct screamed at me to open my eyes, to look at what was happening around us. But I knew that would break the rule. I had to stay still. I had to endure. The humming seemed to circle our table, changing in pitch and rhythm as if it was studying us, trying to coax us into making a mistake. My breath grew ragged, my chest tightening with fear. I wanted to reach out to Eric, to feel some form of connection, but I was too afraid to move. Then, as abruptly as I begun, the humming ceased. I held my breath, waiting, listening. I heard Eric's shaky breathing beside me, but no other sound disturbed the air. "It's over," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I think we can open our eyes now." I hesitated, then slowly cracked my eyes open. The diner was exactly as it had been before, but it felt different, colder, darker. I glanced at Eric, who looked as pale as a ghost. His eyes were wide, darting around the room in a panic. Did you feel that?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It was like something was right here." "Yeah," I replied, my mouth dry. I glanced at the other patrons, expecting to see them staring at us, judging us for our fear. But they all sat motionless, eating their meals as if nothing had happened. I glanced down at my plate, my appetite completely gone. The pancakes looked wrong somehow, grayer, like the color had drained from them. I pushed the plate away, my stomach churning. "Let's get out of here," Eric muttered, his eyes darting nervously to the entrance. "I don't care about the rules anymore. I just want to leave." I opened my mouth to agree when the waitress returned, appearing silently at the edge of the table. My heart nearly stopped. Rule 2, I reminded myself. Don't speak unless spoken to. I clamped my mouth shut and waited, my heart pounding in my ears. "Would you like anything else?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. I shook my head, avoiding her gaze. She lingered for a moment, her presence sending chills down my spine, before turning away and guiding back to the counter. "Okay, that's it," Eric whispered harshly. "We're leaving now." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. As I prepared to stand up, I glanced at my menu again, my eyes catching the list of the rules. Rule 8 loomed in my mind like a warning. If you hear footsteps follow you as you leave, do not turn around. Slow your pace until the sound fades away. We weren't done yet. The worst was yet to come. Eric stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, cutting through the oppressive silence that hung in the diner. A sense of dread washed over me. There was a nagging feeling that we were far from done with this place. Eric reached for his wallet, tossed a few bills onto the table. "Let's just go," he muttered under his breath, his eyes wide and darting towards the entrance. He wanted out, and so did I. We started walking towards the door, the air around us seeming to thicken with every step. My legs felt heavy, as though I was wading through mud. The soft clicking of cutlery and hushed murmurs of the patrons filled the space, but my senses were hyper-focused on our escape. Then, just as we were a few feet from the door, I heard it, the distant scrape of a chair behind us. My heart dropped. Someone had joined our table. I glanced at Eric, whose face had gone ghostly white. "Oh no," he whispered, barely audible over the dining's eerie ambience. "Rule 3. Slowly I turned back to look. There, sitting in my seat, was a tall, lanky figure. The man wore an old-fashioned suit, the kind you see in pictures from decades past. His head was bent forward, his hair hanging over his face like a dark curtain obscuring his features. A wave of cold swept over me. The atmosphere around him felt wrong, as if he didn't belong in this world. "We have to follow the rule," I hissed at Eric, trying to keep my voice steady. "Get back to the table, now." With reluctance, we approached the stranger. He remained utterly still, his head angled forward as if studying something invisible on the table. The room seemed to grow darker, colder, the air pressing down on my chest. My palms were slick with sweat, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. I grabbed my cup of coffee, my hands trembling, and placed it in front of the stranger. "Here," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. Have a sip." His hands moved in slow, deliberate motions as he reached for the cup. His fingers were unnaturally long and thin, with skin that seemed almost translucent. He lifted the cup to his lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip. A chill crawled up my spine, and I fought the urge to look away. "Restroom," I croaked, nudging Eric. "We need to go." Eric nodded, his eyes locked on the stranger. We backed away from the table, careful not to break eye contact until we reached the restroom. The moment we were inside, we both exhaled, as though we were coming up from air after being submerged in dark water. "What the hell was that?" Eric rasped, clutching the edge of the sink. "Who was that guy?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaky. "But we had to follow the rule. Now we wait until the clock chimes." Seconds felt like minutes as we stood there, listening to our own ragged breaths echo in the tiny room. My mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. The air was stifling, pressing down on us, as if the diner itself was alive, watching our every move. Then, the cafe clock outside began to chime. 1, 2, 3 chimes. We exchanged a glance, swallowing the lump of fear lodged in our throats. It was time to return. As we stepped out of the restroom, we dared to approach the table. It was empty. The stranger was gone, leaving only our 2 cups and the uneaten plates of pancakes behind. I exhaled shakily, but my relief was short-lived. As we turned back towards the entrance, something metallic clanked against the floor. I froze. My fork had fallen, clinking loudly as it hit the ground, spinning a few times before settling just under the table. I felt my heart leap into my throat. Rule 7. Should your utensil fall, leave it there. Do not bend down to pick it up, or you risk seeing something under the table that shouldn't be there. "Leave it," I whispered urgently to Eric, who was staring wide-eyed at the fork. "Don't look under the table." He nodded, but his eyes were wide with fear. I could feel the tension radiating off of him, his body rigid and tense. We were both aware of what Rule 7 warned us about, and yet the urge to look was almost unbearable, like an itch in the back of my mind that I just couldn't scratch. Then we heard it, a soft, muffled sound come from beneath the table. My blood ran cold. It was the faint, heart-wrenching sobs of a child, crying softly in the darkness beneath us. My stomach twisted violently, and I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. "Don't listen," I muttered through clenched teeth, my eyes fixed on the point far away. "It's not real. Just focus." The crying grew louder, more desperate, echoing in the small space of the diner. It was the kind of sound that clawed at your heart, demanding your attention. Tears welled up in my eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer terror. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to drown out the noise, but the cries persisted, coming in waves of anguish and despair, each one stronger than the last. Eric shifted uncomfortably beside me. It's just a trick," he whispered more to himself than to me. "We can't look. We can't." The cries turned into words, garbled and barely recognizable, but unmistakable pleading. "Please, help me." The voice tugged at the deepest recess of my sympathies, igniting an instinct to look, to bend down, to see who or what was under there. I clutched my fist so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. "It's not real," I repeated, my voice trembling. "It's just trying to make us look." The crying continued, now mixed with small, shuffling sounds like tiny feet dragged across the floor. My skin crawled, every nerve screamed for me to glance down and see what was beneath the table. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, like the line between what was real and what wasn't blurring under the pressure of the noise. Then a tiny hand wrapped around the leg of my chair. I stiffened, my muscles locking up in paralyzing fear. It gripped tightly, almost urgently, as though begging me to help. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst, my breath coming out in short, panicking gasps. "Don't look," I hissed at Eric, fighting the urge to jump up and run. "It's not real." The grip of my chair tightened, and the crying turned into a pitiful wail. My eyes burned from the effort of not looking down, of not acknowledging the nightmare unfolding beneath us. I could feel my sanity teetering on the edge, about to break. And then, as abruptly as it had started, it stopped. The hand released its grip. The cry faded into silence, and the air around us returned to its suffocating stillness. I dared a glance at Eric, who was pale and shaking, his eyes wide and haunted. Did you see that?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, but we didn't look under the table. We followed the rule." He exhaled shakily, his hand still gripping the edge of the table. "Let's get out of here," he muttered, his voice strained. "I can't take this anymore." "Agreed," I replied, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. We stood up slowly, careful not to glance under the table as we backed away. I couldn't help but notice that the rest of the diner continued on as if nothing had happened. The patrons still eating, the waitress still standing behind the counter with her hollow stare. We started towards the exit, moving cautiously. As we reached the door, I heard it. A faint, distant whisper of footsteps following us. My body tensed, remembering Rule 8. If you hear footsteps following you as you leave, do not turn around. Slow your pace until the sound fades away. "Don't turn around," I warned Eric, my voice strained. "Just walk slowly." We moved forward, each step heavier with fear as the footsteps echoed behind us. I fought every instinct to look back, to see what was trailing us, but I knew if we did, we'd break the rule. And whatever awaited us on the other side of that broken rule would be far worse than anything we had encountered so far. The door was just a few feet away. My hand reached out, grasping the cold handle, and I pushed it open. The footsteps stopped as we crossed the threshold into the foggy night. I turned to Eric, both of us breathing heavily, our faces pale and drawn. "Let's go," I muttered, my voice barely holding together, "and never come back." We hurried down the street, the diner's oppressing aura fading behind us. Neither of us spoke, too afraid of what we might say or what might still be lingering in the air around us. As we rounded the corner, I chanced a final glance back. The diner stood silent, its dim neon sign flickering in the fog. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow at the window, staring out, watching us. I looked away and quickened my pace. whatever had happened in there, I knew one thing for certain. We were never coming back. Any successful serial killer is going to need 3 things: a large capacity freezer, a 24-inch bandsaw, and a can-do attitude, offered a new friend, now half drunk at my kitchen table. And a first victim, I smiled. Rules for Time Traveling by Unidentified User 202. Time traveling is a very delicate matter. One screw-up can mean the end of our continuum. This is why we adhere to a specific set of rules that ensure that time traveling stays safe. Rule 1. This rule is specific to you and more of a reminder that on your birthday, you must go back in time to 2090 to have intercourse with a woman with blonde hair walking into our hotel room. I don't care how you make it happen, just make sure it does. Rule 2. I think this is self-explanatory, but do not kill your grandfather. The universe will end if you do. Rule 3. We make sure that historic events such as the fall of the Soviet Union and the start of the Great Depression happen exactly as it does in our textbooks. You will be stationed at one of these important historical events to make sure everything goes normally. Think of it like a Groundhog Day, unless you see something that was not there before, like an extra animal or a building that is completely different than the one in our logs. It's probably just a tiny time glitch. These don't really need to be worried about. If it is a person, however, restrain them immediately. Go back in time as many times as you need to do so. Otherwise, do not interfere. Do not do so much as crush a fucking bug. You'll be given an invisible cloak and food and water module, so there is no need to eat or drink. Rule 4. There is only one event that we have made sure deliberately does not happen the way it was meant to, and that is J.F. Kennedy's continued reign as president. The higher-ups didn't give me any other details other than you need to make sure that he says the words, "No, they sure can't," before you assassinate him. Rule 5. Do not travel beyond the year 9999. Just don't. Anyway, yeah, that's it. Stay safe out there, new guy. I always laughed inside at the hypothetical scenario of time travelers saying World War I or World War II in response to a question asked by a World War I soldier. That wasn't until I met a time traveler asking if World War III had started yet. My wife and I answered the phone, and now our past has come back to haunt us. By Ever Black Death Mask. We as a species are a creature of lingering regrets. We constantly think of things that we didn't do, the opportunities we missed out on, the alternatives to the choices we have made, and the haunting question of what if? I am no different, and that is what brings me here to share my experience today. I have had a what if question that has persisted in my head like a broken record. It has lingered in the darkest recess of my mind like a cockroach and has continued to fester there to the present day. What if we had come forward with the truth? The answer to this question is not for the faint of heart. What I'm about to describe to you is just as much of a detailed recollection of the events as it is a confession. What you choose to believe is entirely up to all of you, but I need the truth to be out there in order to repent. This all started a few months ago when I began communicating with the dead. Now, this grave endeavor wasn't in vain, mind you. The main reason I entertained this idea and participated was because I was desperate. You see, I have lost a lot of people in my life, people I wish I could see again and communicate with that were no longer here. What I desired most was closure with my loved ones and friends, and death had taken them from me. That was until Jan and I were cleaning our basement out one day. We were moving some miscellaneous junk strewed about the basement to the garage for donation or to the trash. It was nothing more than a typical cleaning project that neither one of us wanted to do, but it had to be done. As I was cleaning out a particular corner of the basement, I stumbled upon a box containing a Ouija board. Now, I didn't remember ever purchasing or acquiring a Ouija board, and I know for certain Jane wouldn't have it either. She was not a fan of creepy things in the slightest. How it ended up there was a complete mystery. My immediate thought was to just throw it away. There was no reason for us to have it. It's not that I didn't believe in the paranormal or anything. I had an experience years ago that made me a believer. I just didn't think it was an item that should continue to be in our household. That is when a thought crossed my mind, one that I should never began to entertain the idea of. What if I could speak with those people I never got a chance to speak with again? This was an idea that intrigued me at the time. Reconnecting with people that were once in my life and knowing that there was a life beyond death provided a strange comfort to me. I can't explain it, but in that moment, I felt like I was compelled to use the board once I found it. After pondering things over for a moment longer, I had made my decision. In hindsight, I should not have made a decision of such magnitude so recklessly, but regardless, my mind was made up. I placed the Ouija board back where I found it, pretending that I hadn't seen it, and proceeded to go about my day acting as if I hadn't seen anything. Tomorrow, when I get home from work, while my wife was still working, I would use the Ouija board. And that is exactly what I did. From that day forward, for months, I spent that 2-hour time period before Jane got home from work downstairs in the basement, communicating with the deceased. My usage of the Ouija board granted me the ability to be able to talk to my mother, my father, my grandmother, my grandfather, and anyone else I so desired to talk to. We discussed the afterlife, my life, and what I never got into when they were here on this soil. It was a relief unlike any other, and I was grateful to be able to break the barrier between the living and the dead to talk to my loved ones. It began so innocently with them. All I had ever intended was to talk to them and get some closure, but it became an addiction. I couldn't stop using the Ouija board. Over time, I had started inviting random spirits to conduct a conversation with me. It became therapeutic for me when I would ask these spirits questions and learn about them in addition to the unknown and beyond. Despite my morbid fixation on conversating with the dead, I never let anything get out of hand. My habit was always restricted to that 2-hour window I had, and I was always going to be in control of the situation. Yesterday, though, that all changed. I was going about things like I normally did with the Ouija board, the candles that circled me illuminating the basement as I called out, "Are there any spirits here that want to communicate at this time?" My words echoed throughout the basement as I patiently awaited a response from beyond the grave. Some time had passed before the planchette I had my hands placed over began to shake. Slowly it moved over to the words, "Yes." I nodded my head and inquired, "Who am I speaking to?" Once more, the planchette began to move and glide over the letters G, R, A, C, and E. I felt myself grow cold as if I had stepped into a meat locker. My eyes widened in horror. That name. "Grace, why are you communicating with me?" My words hung in the air like a fog as I anxiously waited for the spirit to answer. I could feel my heart pulsating very fast, and I did my best to take deep breaths to slow the frantic pace. A moment later, the planchette moved to a series of letters that spelled out the word return. "Return? What do you mean by this?" I inquired, my eyes darting around in the darkness surrounding the candles I had lit. Silence overcast the basement, and nothing was heard besides the thunderous thumping of my heart. I had never experienced anything like this in the months I had used the Ouija board. I had never felt such ominous and dark energy that contaminated the room like a plague. I glanced down at the planchette, wondering if there was even going to be a response, when a gust of wind snuffed out the candles. I blindly looked around, the darkness enveloping my vision as I felt the perspiration form on my forehead from fright. It felt like I was being watched, but by who, I could not tell. It was a feeling that lurked as I felt an icy, cold hand grip my shoulder. I stood still as a statue, rooted to the spot in horror, as a voice whispered a command into my ear. "Run!" That's when my adrenaline kicked in and I bolted up the stairs. I closed the basement door behind me and went up to Jane and I's room to hide and to calm down. I didn't move from my place in our bedroom until Jane had come home from work. I didn't dare tell her what had occurred. The last thing I wanted for her to feel was unsafe and scared in the comfort of our home. I collected myself and went downstairs to greet her and resumed the evening like it was any other. When it was time to call it night, I waited for her to go upstairs before going back down and hiding the Ouija board. I would take care of its disposal in the morning while Jane still slept. In the meantime, however, I was going to catch some much-needed rest and put this whole bizarre fixation of mine behind me. I promised myself from that moment onward that I would never communicate with the dead ever again. My weird addiction to the Ouija board had to end for the sake of my sanity and well-being. The room was painfully quiet in the early hours of the morning, almost as if time itself had stopped entirely. Darkness cloaked the room like a massive blanket as I lay next to Jane. A faint light creeped in through the window, allowing for light visibility of various pieces of furniture in the bedroom. My eyes scanned the room for a moment for any anomalies before resting my gaze upon her. She was still sound asleep, her breathing rhythmic as she continued to dream in peace. Her arms were wrapped around me lightly like vines on a tree trunk. I slowly wiggled free from her grasp and rolled onto my side. I was still in a dazed state, my eyelids fighting a losing battle to stay open as I became self-aware of my heart being against my ribcage. It thudded rapidly, like it had been engulfed in a nightmare. I couldn't remember if I had been dreaming or not, but it must not have been important if I couldn't remember, right? That's what I told myself as I closed my eyes and wrapped myself back into the sheets like a cocoon. I lay still for a while, waiting for sleep to overtake my consciousness. When it seemed as though I was about to doze off, my cell phone that was on my nightside table lit up like a Christmas tree and began to ring. The vibration of the device buzzing on the table grated my eardrums as I let out a groan of frustration. I sluggishly reached out and silenced the phone without even acknowledging who it was. I turned to my wife to see if she had stirred at all, but thankfully, to my delight, she had not been ripped from her slumber. I breathed a sigh of relief as I looked at the time, 3:03 a.m. "Give me a break," I mumbled irritatedly to myself as I turned back over, hoping to get some sleep. The idea of having to go to work on just a couple hours of sleep was not a pleasant thought. The last thing I wanted to do was daydream about dreaming. I closed my eyes and tried my best to silence my thoughts, but not even a moment after I had nestled into the warm embrace of the sheets, the phone rang again. My eyes shot open and I lunged out into the void of darkness to silence the phone. Good God, can I just get some rest? I buried my head under my blanket and face planted into the pillow, not wanting to think, see, or hear anything until 6 a.m. sharp when I absolutely had to be awake. The sound of my phone going off seconds after my face connected with the pillow indicated that someone was still trying to get in touch with me. I begrudgingly lifted my face from the pillow and squinted to look at my phone, which shone like a beacon of light on the bedside table. I exhaled angrily as I yanked the phone from its place on the table and stared down at the screen. My heart immediately sunk as I read the name of the person who was vehemently blowing up my phone. Grace. It was the same name that was spelt on the Ouija board earlier. I was confused. How was a spirit contacting me outside of the board? Was this a spirit that I thought it was? I chalked it up to all being a strange coincidence and put that dreadful thought to rest. I hit decline on the phone, and not even a second after I did, the phone began to ring again. This person doesn't give up, I thought as I pressed the decline call. The phone lit up and hummed violently as Grace continued to call again and again. I promptly kept declining the calls as they came through, and I was able to eventually block the person, resulting in a blissful silence falling upon the room. I gently placed the phone back down, and I was about to lay back down when I noticed Jane sitting up, looking at me in pure confusion. In the midst of all the chaos, I neglected the fact that the constant noise of my phone and I would have woken her. "What's going on?" she asked as a yawn escaped her lips. "Nothing, Jane. It was just some stupid scam caller or something. I took care of it," I reassured as I returned to my place beside her in the comfort of our bed. As soon as she and I began to get comfortable, that familiar humming sound filled the air, indicating that my phone was going off. "Apparently you didn't," she quipped as I snatched the phone from its resting place and messed with its settings. I was perplexed. I had blocked this person, so how was the same number calling? I decided to take the matters a step further and turned my phone off. I held the power button on my phone and watched the brand logo light up on the screen before dimming and blacking out completely. There, now I did. I breathed a sigh of relief as I returned to Jane's side and gave a light smile. That was way more complicated than it needed to be. We shared a laugh as we both laid on our backs and snuggled together under the sheets. "I noticed. Seemed like you got a stalker," she teased as she wrapped her arms around my torso and placed her head on my chest. "Who wants to stalk someone like me, though?" "I don't know. You tell me." She raised her head to look at me in the face and raised a slight brow jokingly. In that moment, I wanted to tell her the person's name, but decided it was better to withhold the information. There was no need to bother her with something as small as a name in the grand scheme of things. Before I could give her a reply to her question, though, my phone rang yet again. This time, Jane and I both sat straight up in bed, immediately alarmed at what we were hearing. You turned that off, right?" she asked with a concerned tone, her face peering over at my bedside table. "Yeah, I turned the phone off. Did you not see me turn the phone off?" I felt like my arms weighed 1,000 tons and my fingers shook as I took the phone and brought it to my face. I stood there and just stared at the bright lit screen, the name Grace striking fear into my heart. "Grace? Who is this Grace and why is she calling you? It's 3 a.m, Jane said, clearly agitated and suspicious of the fact that another woman was calling me in the early hours of the morning. "I don't know, but I'm going to answer and figure out what the meaning of this is." I pressed accept on the phone call and brought it up to my ear. "Listen, I don't know who you think you are, but..." I was interrupted by a burst of static that sounded like a radio trying to find a proper frequency. "Hello? Is anybody there?" I asked as I glanced over my shoulder at Jane, who appeared to be a nervous wreck. She looked how I felt internally, but I needed to be strong for her. I didn't want to look scared, but it was hard not to be. The whole thing was certainly strange. "Put it on speaker." Her voice trembled with a worried tone. I nodded my head and pulled the phone away from my ear. I pressed the speaker button and we both listened with racing hearts as the static continued to blare. The noise persisted for a while before a faint voice crept through. "Hello?" The voice was weak, but there was no mistaking it. Someone was on the line. "Yes, hello. Who is this? How did you get my number?" The questions poured out of me at a rapid-fire pace as I was trying to rationalize the scenario we found ourselves in. There was no response to anything I asked, and instead we were left to listen to the static, deafening sound from the speaker. The moments we spent waiting for a response seemed to drag on in dog ears, but eventually the voice returned, this time much clearer.
is Grace.
I felt my blood turn to ice, every word piercing my skin like a haunting knife as I looked over at Jane, who shared the same horrific expression as myself. I felt my grip loosen on the phone as the words seemingly spun around me. This couldn't be real. None of this is real.
Leave us alone.
Jane's voice broke the silence between the two of us. She seized the phone from what little grasp I still had and tried to decline the call. No matter how many times she attempted to hang up, though, the call would not end. If anything, the static sound would get louder and louder, forcing Jane and I to cover our ears. As quickly as the static noise raised itself to ear-piercing decibels, it stopped. Jane and I were afraid to breathe as we listened to the phone for any signs of life besides our own. I could feel my limbs trembling from the fear and the adrenaline. I was afraid to move in any capacity. I clutched my eyes shut and prayed for this to end. I could feel Jane's face hovering above my shoulder, and I could hear her trying to stifle cries of terror. The silence on the other side of the line was somehow more deafening than the static coming through just moments ago. It was not to last, however, as the voice returned and spoke clear as day from the other side of the line.
I'm here.
The voice stated in an aggressive rasp before the phone call suddenly ended and the screen went black. Jane and I sat in the darkness, paralyzed by our own fear. We weren't sure what to make of what had just happened. It was like a piece of fiction had just come to life. There was nothing fictitious about this, however. This was the gravity of the situation coming crashing down upon us. There was a reason why that name had sounded so familiar earlier downstairs with the Ouija board. The voice on the phone all but confirmed our suspicions. She and I locked eyes in horror, and I felt myself shiver at the revelation. The spirit from the Ouija board and the voice on the phone were the same entity. It was Grace, our daughter we had killed 10 years ago. When the devil offered me a guaranteed lottery win in exchange for 1 year off the lifespan of every human on Earth, I accepted without a second thought. Waking up the next day to discover 80% of the population had mysteriously died overnight, I began to question if I had made the right decision. And now the stories have come to an end. If you're still awake, well, I hope you fall asleep shortly. And the sounds that you're hearing in the background are going to take center stage for no more than 30 minutes to help you fall asleep or stay asleep. But if you are awake and want to hear more stories, I do have playlists for that as well. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.